Hey guys, thought I'd show you something a little different really quickly. Part of the knife that you never see, especially when you construct them with epoxy and pins, is the inside of the handle scales and the liners and that. So I thought I'd show you really briefly my method. Now this isn't the best method necessarily or the worst, or this is just what I do, and it's been successful for me. So these are the scales for the Woodsman. You can see, as in my last video, I mentioned that you do the you grind down the where the scales meet the ricasso before you epoxy them, obviously, so that you because you can't finish them once they're on the knife. So I decided to go with the Coyote Brown liners, and you can see what I do. I still have to get these small little sort of frayed edges out, but I drill a ton of little holes in the actual liner. This is the G10 itself. I mean, I guess you could say it lightens it up too, but that's not the point at all. The point is just so that when you see the knife, which is right here, I got everything kind of messy right now, but first of all, on the knife itself, I take like my Dremel tool with a diamond bit, and I put in these marks all over the tang. You can see in the light, those are just very shallow, basically scratches in the tang. I do that on both sides. That's another thing for the epoxy to grab onto. And then when I put the scales, you can see on the inside of the scale, I'm still going to clean this one up a bit. I always use alcohol and clean them up first to make sure there's no oil on them or anything, but I drill really shallow holes into the scale. So then what you end up getting is the scale, and you got to measure that covered with epoxy. So the epoxy's going into these little holes here, or these little kind of divots or craters or whatever. Then the liner goes over top. You cover that with epoxy, so now you have epoxy going through the liner and into the scale, because the epoxy is almost like a liquid. It will go through these holes and kind of fill the shallow parts naturally. Then you have the blade, which A, the scratches will hold onto the epoxy, and then B, you drill these extra kind of weight reducing holes, and they also allow you, then when you coat that with epoxy, the epoxy will go through. So now you have epoxy in the handle going through the liner, coming up through the tang of the knife, and then you basically repeat it on the other side. So then you'll have that liner, and then the other scale also has the little kind of just drill pressed holes, really shallow though, in it. And you put that on, and then when you put your pins in and your lanyard hole, essentially, I mean, I don't plan it to line them up at all, but just by nature of having so many small holes, you can't really see, but some of them will line up with the larger ones in the tang and with the other small ones in the liner underneath, so that you'll end up with essentially epoxy pins running through the blade as well as your steel pins that you put in there. So that's just an extra step I take. It does take a little bit of time, but I mean, the epoxy I use would hold without doing any of this. If you just had perfectly flat scale, flat everything, it would still hold. But this way, once it cures, there's actually epoxy that is cured and runs right through both scales and the liners and the tang of the knife. Just just extra peace of mind, a little bit more strength and rigidity in the blade. So there's a look at. This is still a work in progress, but once it's all cleaned up in epoxy, that's one of them. I've gone ahead and done got the Tanto scratched up as well, and the EDC blades. I'm still working on the scales for those, so just thought I'd show you guys that. I don't think I've shown you something like that before, so just so you know, it's not just plain G10 and plain micarta when you epoxy it. It's actually a little more to it than that, to make sure that once it's epoxy, the epoxy actually has something to hold on to inside all those materials. So thanks for watching, guys.